The question is, what family lawyers need to know about vocational assessments used to determine earning capacity? I think what family lawyers need to know is, I think maybe a biggest misconception is that a vocational assessment can be done without meeting with the person. So again, based on record review, depositions, complaints, school records, tax records, different things like that, that is sufficient information to conduct a vocational assessment and determine earning capacity. Ideally, it would be best if we could meet with the person and meet with the individual in question in person, but that's not necessary. And so I think one of the biggest misperceptions is that there needs to be an actual meeting between somebody like myself and the individual being evaluated. And that's simply just not true. So that's something to keep in mind. And also, I follow up to that would be the vocational assessment in terms of earning capacity can be used to evaluate the person's current earning capacity based on their skills, earning capacity if they were to acquire additional skills, and also earning capacity if they were to relocate to a different area. So we talk about earning capacity there, those would be relevant factors that a vocational evaluation could help with. Next question would be, what should be in a vocational assessment report? Are there any particular professional standards or ethics that particularly apply to reports and testimony? And I think when we talk about a vocational assessment report, I've outlined kind of the core elements of it previously, but we'll do so again. And that is going to be the information, background information about the individual, primarily their age, educational, work experience. And then the second major component of that should be is how does that person's skills translate to the labor market in terms of the types of jobs that are available to that individual, and how much do those jobs command in terms of earnings based on the geographic question or the geographic area in question. So would be important to put everything into a geographical context in terms of earning capacity. Obviously, earnings are going to vary for job based on Memphis versus Jackson, Mississippi versus Dyersburg, Tennessee. So geographic proximity needs to become an issue and needs to be, earnings need to be grounded in the person's geographic area. In terms of standards, there are different standards. There are different groups that provide oversight and ethical guidance. The American Board of Vocational Experts is a group that does that. The Commission on Rehab Counselor Certification does that as well. And then simply somebody like myself who has a PhD, who is aligned with those organizations or other professional organizations, provide some professional guidance of things that should be the standards that are involved in providing an assessment and conducting a report. In terms of guidance on testimony, I think that's going to be the same thing in terms of professional standards, but I think the biggest issue is the testimony should be specifically focused on earning capacity and the questions at hand. And sometimes vocational evaluators might try to go a little bit too far afield, maybe bring into some other areas. For example, an area that somebody can run into problems with is we are trained as vocational evaluators on taking medical information and using that to determine how a person can function in the labor market. What we can't do, and this is where people run into some problems, is start talking about prognosis of medical conditions, causation of medical conditions, viable treatments for medical conditions, and that's just simply not in our area, and that's not something that we should ethically be involved with. So clear line between taking medical information and transposing it to looking at vocational impairment. Yes, we can do that. Looking at causation, treatment, prognosis, no, that's something that we can't do, but people sometimes get into that area. Another question would be, in a deposition format, what are some challenging questions family lawyers should ask for forensic vocational experts? And I think the challenging questions would be, or a challenging question, I don't think these are that challenging, honestly, but I think the questions that you really want to focus in on is what is the source of your opinion and what are you basing your opinion on in terms of skills and abilities? And how did you discern the person's skills and abilities? And if a person hasn't been in the labor market, how are you projecting that a person's previous experiences or educational backgrounds translate to the current labor market if a person's been out of the labor market for a while? So I think those are fairly straightforward questions that can be asked and answered. But again, I think important questions to ask an individual. I think also you might, from a challenging perspective, if there are medical conditions or psychological conditions or other chronic health conditions, some evaluators might get hung up on the things that I just mentioned about talking about prognosis, treatment planning, causation, and that would be something that you would want to try to highlight as well and try to get somebody to really clarify where they stand on that. Again, if you were to ask me those questions, I would say I don't deal with prognosis, I don't deal with treatment, and I don't deal with causation. So all I can do is take a look at the restrictions that are relevant to the individual based on their chronic health condition and talk about how those relate to the labor market. But again, some people might slide into that path talking about looking at causation or different things along those lines. Another factor that you might want to consider too with somebody when there's some psychological distress and psychological conditions is sometimes vocational evaluators do not factor those issues in to looking at a person's potential earning capacity. And that would be a very important component of coming up with a good vocational analysis. So sometimes vocational evaluators, maybe with a master's degree or less experience, might steer away from addressing those issues of psychological conditions such as depression, anxiety, PTSD, or other conditions that might present with some psychological factors like fibromyalgia, different things like that. And those are definitely factors that should be considered. And if somebody didn't consider those issues, that would be a major issue that can impact the validity of their report and their analysis. Related to that, another area might be pain, how a person's pain and chronic pain, the presentation of pain impacts how they function. And sometimes a less experienced or more novice vocational evaluator will steer away from pain, just like they do psychological conditions. And that would be, in my opinion, a premise for an incomplete vocational analysis. So those types of factors should be considered, and questioning an evaluator on those areas if they haven't been considered, or it looks like they have minimized or not considered that fully, would be very good questioning, in my opinion. For testimony, what are some of the keys for your direct examination? So if I'm looking at myself as the evaluator that you're working with, and like what would be the keys to my direct examination, things that I want you to highlight regarding me and my presentation to the court would certainly be my qualifications and experience, not only academically, but my long experience of conducting vocational assessments, both in the family law setting, but also in other areas like personal injury, medical malpractice, wrongful termination, wrongful death cases as well, to kind of highlight the experience that somebody like myself has had in analyzing vocational matters as it relates to a variety of settings, not only family law, but other areas as well. Bringing in personal injury and medical malpractice might be particularly relevant if you're working with a client who has some secondary chronic health conditions that are impacting their ability to work too, because then that makes the connection that not only do I deal with earning capacity, but I also have that experience of analyzing medical information as well, which is very customary in the personal injury matter. And then I think just straightforward questions on direct examination of just outlining the methodology and findings are just, I think, key basic questions. I don't think the direct examination, in my perspective, needs to be complicated, because there's nothing really that, from my perspective, complicated to really express. But again, primarily trying to be foundational in terms of qualifications, experience, and foundation for the report. Regarding evidence is,
David?
Yes.
To tag on to your answer there, have you found that judges need you to explain certain aspects of your methodology? Especially what if it's a judge relatively new to the bench that may not have had experience working with a vocational expert witness in their practice? Have you found certain themes or information that you give them or give the particular judge that can help their understanding?
Yes, I think questions would typically come up from maybe a judge who's not as experienced regarding methodology to determine earning capacity. Specifically, I found in family law more issue of medical. How does a person's medical condition impact earning capacity? Those would be questions that a judge may need some clarification on, and would be something that I could help clarify and would need to clarify. And then also, I think sometimes labor market information, this will go to a later question about sources of data. I put a lot of credence in, and I think most people do, the U.S. Department of Labor data as being the best source of data. And I think sometimes judges need to be aware of why that is the case. And that is because it's not only locally derived, but also nationally derived. So it provides, to me, kind of the gold standard for labor market information. So I would say those are the two areas that judges usually need some clarification on.
Thank you.
The question is, what are some of the best sources of descriptive evidence or demonstrative evidence, like graphs and charts? And I have found in my practice that is in my area, maybe unlike a forensic accountant, charts and graphs do not lend well to testimony and potentially only complicate testimony in my area. So I do not present with a lot of graphs or charts. I don't find those to be that relevant, and I also think they can become very distractive. So I'm able to convey the necessary information just on direct examination and cross-examination. I don't think any type of demonstrated evidence or evidence that can be visible to the jury or to the judge, or in the case of personal injury to the jury, is really that relevant and adds to the testimony. So next question is about trustworthiness of data. So what are the most trustworthy data sources, and then also the least trustworthy? So I would say the most trusted data, as I've indicated, is the Department of Labor, United States Department of Labor data in terms of wages. They also have very good data on job availability, where they talk about projected growth of certain areas. And I think that's really critical. So we can look at jobs that are expanding, jobs that are declining. I have found one of the key things that sometimes people, other vocational experts, get hung up on is they might come up with jobs that are available to the person from a theoretical perspective. And what I mean by a theoretical perspective is they're jobs that are now being phased out of the labor market. They're in decline. They're no longer needed. And so they're kind of being phased out. So opinion that would highlight, oh, here's 5 jobs, but you know what, these jobs are being phased out, isn't a very good opinion, versus an opinion that here are 5 jobs and these are high growth expected over the next 10 years. That's going to be a much stronger opinion. So U.S. Department of Labor data is some of the best data. I also think, you have these other sources like Indeed and that are, I would call them supplemental sources. Some of these labor market data, job search engines, I would call them supplemental sources. I would not call them primary sources. They're good to incorporate, but they would not be the foundational piece for an opinion. So I think if somebody's just using their opinion based on Indeed or comparable type search, that would not be very valid. And some of the other types of unusual cases, like I had a case that I'm involved with a vet surgeon, or some of these other unique cases that jobs are not typically profiled. Just sometimes just good old fashioned labor market research, looking at the labor market, conducting, calling people, calling institutions. Like, for example, the vet surgeon case, I contacted a couple vet med programs that are training people as vet surgeons. What, from your perspective in placing people, what do you see as being job growth? What does a typical vet surgeon earn in this particular geographic area? So just good old fashioned, what I would call labor market research, is at times needed and a very good source. So another question is there anything in particular family lawyers routinely misunderstand as part of the vocational assessment process, reviewing reports, taking depositions, or testimony? And the question is a good question, and I think it revolves around sometimes labor market data might be an area that people get hung up on sometimes. And again, I think that's where I'd fall back to Bureau of Labor Statistics data, Department of Labor data. In cross-examination, I get asked a lot about whether or not I think somebody should work, and that's not my area. It's not my determination of should this person work. That's really not something that I'm involved with. I'm here to just comment on the person's capacity. But that's a common question that I get asked a lot. And I don't know if it's a misunderstanding or kind of a trap to get me to say, yeah, I think Miss Smith or Mr. Jones should work. So, those are things that are common. I'm perceiving them maybe as misunderstandings where, maybe they're not. Another thing is, again, this concept that I've hit on several times is I don't need to meet with a person to do a vocational assessment. So if that's something that you're thinking is needed, that I actually need to meet with a person, you go to the court denies, an in-person evaluation. That does not preclude a vocational assessment from taking place. So there are obvious limitations associated with that versus an in-person, but that doesn't preclude a vocational evaluation from taking place. It also, although it may reduce the efficacy of the vocational evaluation some, in my opinion, it does not reduce it significantly where the information provided is marginal or can't be used. So that would be something to keep in mind as well. And then the last question is, or one of the last questions in this area is, what advice do you have for family lawyers who need to find, select, or engage a forensic expert witness? And I think my advice to you would be is finding somebody that you feel comfortable working with, and somebody that you feel is somebody that you can work with and talk with and can be a consultant to you on your case as well. And I think what's really important about it, I think, is also to hear information. The person can tell you the information that might be something you don't want to hear. Like, hey, this person really can't work, or this person can work, or this person, you think this person might be able to earn $80,000 when the person can only earn $40,000. So I think you want to try to find an expert who you feel you have the trust, is trustworthy, is going to be a consultant for you, but also tell you information in an honest, candid way. The worst thing that I could do for somebody like yourself is tell you something in your office right now about what a person can do, and then go to court and get completely shredded with, no, the person actually can't do that. And now, you're left out there with, you thought you had an opinion versus, the opinion just got completely shot down. So I think you want to find a person who you value and find trust in. I would tell you from my perspective, I will tell you what I say this all the time. It doesn't matter if your firm hires me or some other divorce firm hires me, I'm going to give you the same information that I am the other firm. So, and I think that to me is the hallmark of a good vocational expert, is going to tell you what it is and not tell you what you want to hear, but what you need to hear about the case so that you can make good legal decisions about how you're representing the individual.